Hey, happy Friday. This week, Microsoft announced the end of Windows 10 with some surprising costs at the end. Apparently, Amazon faked much of its AI self-checkout tech, and the random guy saved us from a cybersecurity nightmare. Welcome to the Friday Checkout. This video was sponsored by Ground News. The brief this week starts with a new report from Bloomberg's Mark Gurman that suggests that Apple is exploring home robotics devices as the company's next big moonshot project after their EV project died. This includes a mobile robot that can follow the users around and also a tabletop device that uses robotics to move a display around. My expectation is that these robots will be specifically trained to unplug any competing device like an Amazon Echo and also to loudly yell, "Green bubbles!" as soon as they see you using an Android phone. Something like that. And in even more Apple news, the company's first OLED iPad Pro with M3 chips, as well as new large-screen iPad Airs, are both expected to launch in May. These will be the first new iPads of the company in nearly 2 years. And then, moving on to Google, a new report suggests that the company is considering charging users for AI-powered search, probably as a part of the Google One subscription bundle. Apparently, executives haven't decided on the details just yet, but that could be a pretty big shakeup to Google's business model. Next is probably the most fun way I've ever seen to visualize where a solar eclipse would be visible from. This cute map from AirDNA shows people in the United States making their way to booking Airbnb places on the path of the solar eclipse that is happening on the 8th of April next week. Very wholesome. And then in even more celestial news, the White House has asked NASA this week to start working on a time standard for the moon. It's going to be called the Coordinated Lunar Time, and it means that astronauts on the moon would no longer have to synchronize with either Houston or Moscow or whatever time zone their HQ was in. Soon it's gonna be moon o'clock, baby. Alright, let's move on to the new releases of the week. And we're starting with the new Red Magic Cooler 5 Pro, which is a cooler that you can attach to a phone using either a clip or MagSafe if you have an iPhone. And the company claims that this can drop temperatures by a pretty bonkers 35 degrees Celsius during gaming sessions. I refuse to believe that 35 degrees of cooling on a phone is not some weird edge case, but I guess that's pretty cool. Get it? Cool. And next, Motorola launched the Edge 50 Pro this week with Pantone colors on the back, a Pantone-validated True Color display, and a Pantone-validated camera as well, plus also a Moto fragrance in the box, meaning that there's now a perfumed unboxing experience. Do we want perfumed unboxings of phones? Is that a thing? I can't decide. And in perhaps more practical releases, LifeX launched 2 new smart light bulbs that can hit 1,600 lumens and also work with Matter without the need for an additional bridge. Kinda cool. Okay, and for my first story of the week, Microsoft has just started the process of preparing the world for the end of Windows 10. So Windows 10 is going to become end of life in October 2025, just 10 years after it was originally launched. The last major Windows 10 release was version 22H2, and security updates are only expected to roll out for another year and a half from now. And this week, Microsoft announced that businesses who want to extend support beyond that will have to pay first $61 per device for year 1, then $122 for year 2, and $244 for year 3 per device beyond that. I guess we're gonna see a similar kind of announcement for consumers soon too, but yeah, that's pretty expensive, so you might just want to leave Windows 10 altogether after the 10 years are over. Data from StatCounter suggests that over 69% of desktops using Windows still use Windows 10, with Windows 11 only sitting at 26.7% so far, and even Windows 7 apparently still has 3%. In 2021, Microsoft said that Windows 10 was at 1.3 billion monthly active devices, and then in 2023, Windows 11 was reported to be used by more than 400 million monthly active devices, so my guess is that today around 900 million to maybe even a billion devices are still using Windows 10. Windows 10 was so successful because Microsoft was extremely aggressive about pushing the update through to Windows 7 users, while with 11 they took the exact opposite approach, which means it's much slower. Now, to be fair, a lot of people are naturally going to be leaving Windows 10 behind in the next 1.5 years because a lot of machines are just naturally going to age and kind of be left behind. But yeah, this is going to be a tough end-of-life situation. Okay, and for my second story of the week, it turns out that Amazon was apparently faking much of its AI self-checkout magic. So Amazon this week has announced that it is giving up on its cashierless Just Walk Out technology at its Amazon Fresh grocery stores. This was the supposed magical technology where you just grabbed stuff off the shelves, then you left the store, and the company automatically deducted the right payment from your account using cameras and sensors. All of this was supposed to be powered by AI, except AI apparently is short for an Indian watching you shop over video. A report from The Information this week said that actually Amazon had more than 1,000 people in India manually reviewing and data labeling Just Walk Out footage to train the machine learning models. And the report claims that 700 reviews were needed for every 1,000 sales. That means that something like 70% of all transactions still needed a human in the loop, just one that was remote. That is insanely high and of course way higher than Amazon's original target of 2%. This explains why people reported sometimes having to wait hours before their purchases actually got charged, and it sounds like Amazon ran into the exact same problem as self-driving cars. Sure, it's technically possible to automate really complex processes, except it's way harder than we initially predicted. So instead, the company is now switching to shopping carts that can detect what you have put into them with built-in checkout screens and scanners via RFID self-checkout, which seems to be working fairly well and is also used by other retailers like Decathlon already. Okay, and for my third story of the week, we have a malware story that would have honestly made Hollywood screenwriters blush. So the story is that a random Microsoft employee named Andres Freund kind of accidentally found and halted what would have become one of the worst backdoors ever. Freud was benchmarking some random logins on Linux and basically accidentally found that some of the failed login processes are taking a little bit too much CPU power and taking like half a second too long to load. So he investigated. He himself said on Mastodon that, quote, "We got unreasonably lucky as he found that that extra CPU power was used by a new version of a common file compression tool called XZUtils doing some shady things to give attackers access to whole systems." He found this right before the malicious update was sent out to millions of devices around the world that power basically the entire internet, hospitals, military institutions, etc., etc. And if he hadn't found them, that means that the attackers would have gotten access to an insane number of critical computers. The attackers that added the backdoor reportedly made a GitHub account in 2021, then started adding regular contributions to the open source project soon after, and slowly worked their way into becoming trusted contributors who then added the malicious code bit by bit as the original contributor of the project got burnt out. If you've ever seen this famous comic from years ago that shows that all modern digital infrastructure relies on this project that some random person in Nebraska has thanklessly maintained since 2003, well, apparently that is insanely prophetic. The attacker even created fake profiles to urge the project to change maintainers because of the original person suffering from that burnout. This was resisted, but yikes. Apparently the attackers are state-sponsored in some way, at least that's what the suspicions are, and it's great that we have avoided the disaster, but damn, what a mess. Now moving on, another big news story this week was that Tesla saw its first major sales decline in many years, with sales falling by almost 100,000 units or 20% from last quarter, or more than 8% year over year. Sounds bad, and if you're wondering where you could read about what media around the world thinks about news stories like this, then the answer of course is over at Ground News. This Tesla story, for example, was picked up by over 100 news outlets that Ground News tracks, and I can see that about 35% of those were left-leaning versus 14% on the right. That is a slight bias, but not too bad. Ground News is a website and an app that aggregates and contextualizes news in a really helpful way. So I can click through left, center, and right-leaning news sources for each story, so I can see how various news outlets cover the same thing from various angles, and I can easily weed out the sources that I'd really want to avoid. For example, Epoch Times here, which not only has low factuality, but is also owned by the Falun Gong, a group that, according to Wikipedia, has anti-evolutionary views, opposes modern medicine, and also supports QAnon, among other things. That is a dodged bullet if I've ever seen one. Seeing funding and factuality information comes standard with a premium subscription, and it helps me avoid blindly tapping into the political biases of the news outlets. There is even a dedicated blind spot section that shows you news stories that were mostly covered only by one side of the political spectrum, and you can also customize your feed so you can see more news from a specific region or a topic that you care about. To get smarter about the news, go to ground.news/Friday checkout and click on the link in the description, and don't forget to try a premium subscription for a full picture. You can get 40% with my link, so be sure to use that, and I'll see you next Friday.